Is one recognized in equity as the owner of something because use and title belongs to that person, even though legal title belongs to someone else. So look at this definition, meaning of beneficial owner generally, the dictionary meaning. Nowhere this section talks of indirect holding of voting power. It does not talk of indirect holding. Now again, let us compare this with the provision in international transfer pricing. In international transfer pricing, an associated enterprise is defined, and there is 26% holding of voting power. Let us see how it is defined. Look at Para 2, section 98(2). The term associated entities is clearly defined to include an enterprise holding, and see these words, directly or indirectly, shares carrying not less than 26% of the voting power in the other enterprise. So in international transfer pricing in 98(2), they clearly write the words direct or indirect. Whereas in section 48(2), substantial interest, one should be beneficial owner of 20% of voting power. The words direct or indirect are not used. Let us also see whether we have any support in terms of case laws. The term beneficial owner is used in section 79 also in the same manner. Section 79 carry forward and set off of losses of a closely held company. Now here it says that when there is a change in more than 51% of the beneficial holding in a closely held company, change in shareholding should be seen at immediate holding company level. On section 79, take an example. X Limited holds 75% of share capital of B Limited, and B Limited holds 75% of capital of C Limited. Now, if A Limited transfers 75% holding of B Limited, one can say that indirectly it has transferred holding of C Limited also. But we have several judgments that transfer of shares at ultimate holding company level is to be ignored, and here beneficial ownership is to be considered at immediate level. Because here also this section does not use the words direct or indirect. So we can use all those judgments in 48(2) and take the view that indirect holding in step down subsidiaries is not covered. But here there is one caveat, that if suppose the officer is able to prove that this intermediary subsidiary company is only a conduit, it is not doing anything. In substance, the control of the ultimate subsidiary is with ultimate holding company. In that case, probably this argument may not work. But generally, if you see in India, although now the new companies have permits only 2 layers of holding subsidiary, here we have several companies where there are 6 to 7 levels of subsidiary companies existing. Now one cannot say that all these intermediary companies are conduit and they are not operative and ultimate control lies with the ultimate holding company. So this argument that transactions between a holding company and step down subsidiary are not covered is important. Now let me come back to what we were doing up to last year while writing the tax audit report. Under 48(2), we were reporting even step down subsidiaries because at that time we were not that conscious. I have seen in many reports step down subsidiaries are considered as related party. Now if consciously for transfer pricing we are taking the view that no step down subsidiaries are not covered, please check that when you copy paste last year's report in current year's tax audit report, you remove step down subsidiaries. Otherwise, there will be contradiction between tax audit report and transfer pricing report. And once you report at one place probably it will not be possible to justify that you are taking a different view. So don't offer it at both the places, that is the only point. One more point which was covered earlier, whether in case of 48 transactions, income is covered. Now after so many discussions, a view has clearly emerged that no, income side is not covered unless it is a transaction between exempt and non-exempt entity or between exempt and non-exempt unit. The only point which was being considered earlier was that section 92(2)(a) is drafted in this way. Any allowance for an expenditure or interest or allocation of any cost or expense or any income in relation to the specified domestic transactions shall be computed having regard to arm's length price. So subsection 2A talks of income also. Is income covered? Now let us look at 92BA. 92BA specifically provides any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made to a person referred to in 40A(2)(b). So, in what case then income is covered? Why subsection 2A covers income? It is very clear, it covers income only in case of transactions between exempt and non-exempt entity covered by 80IA 8, 80IA 10 or 10AA. But not if both the entities are not claiming any exemption. Income side is not covered. Only the person making payment has to report. The other entity does not have to report. Now, what kind of expenses are generally covered? This is just an illustrative list. Purchase of goods, procurement of services, expenditure on salary, training services, marketing expenses, interest payments, purchase of tangible and intangible property, director's remuneration, commission, sitting fees, group charges, reimbursement of expenditure and guarantee fees expenditure. Now I think here I would like to discuss two of the expenses. One is capital expenditure, which was again discussed in the first session. So as it was rightly mentioned, if the capital expenditure is on scientific research and we are claiming 100% deduction under section 35, or if the capital expenditure is in relation to a business where we are claiming deduction under section 35(a)(d) and it is paid to a related party, in my opinion, it should be reported if the payment is made to related party, even if it is capital expenditure. Because if you go by the language of 48(2), it speaks of any expenditure which is claimed as deduction. See, if you have claimed an expenditure as deduction either under 35 or under 35(a)(b)(d), AD, 36, 37, all such expenses should be covered. But if it is a capital expenditure on which you have not claimed any such deduction directly, but you have claimed only depreciation, normal plus say additional in case of plant and machinery. In that case, as she rightly mentioned, it is a capital expenditure which is not claimed as an expenditure. Depreciation is an allowance, is an additional argument available. So now the question is whether such capital expenditure which is not directly claimed as deduction should be reported, or you should give a remark that taking this view such expenditure is not reported. Now if you see Institute's guidance note, Earlier, it suggested that such expenditure should be reported. The revised guidance note suggests that it need not be reported. Now, the only question is whether it should be given by way of an explanation that such expenditure is not covered because a view is taken that the expenditure is not directly claimed in the form of expenditure. Depreciation is claimed and depreciation is an allowance. The fear of many chartered accountants is that once you give this note, the officer will not leave it. But suppose he doesn't leave it, probably it will not be a case fit for any penalty. It will not amount to non-reporting. So whether to give such a remark or not, it is a call that a taxpayer has to take, or rather a chartered accountant has to take whether in his report he wants to give a remark or clarification that it is not covered. I would rather suggest, even if no remark is given, probably there is a clear case that it is not covered within the ambit of 48. If it is not covered there, it is not covered by transfer pricing provisions. Another aspect out of these expenses is reimbursement of expenses. Now I think reimbursement of expenses can be divided into two categories. Suppose I am paying excise duty or custom duty to an agent which he pays to the government, or my sister concern makes payment on my behalf where the expenditure is contracted by me but I don't have fund and he pays on my behalf and I am simply reimbursing at cost. Whether such reimbursement of expenditure is covered. According to me, such expenses are not covered because originally the expenditure is mine, and suppose the clearing and forwarding agent is a related party, I am not making payment for an expenditure to him, but that expenditure was mine, he has paid on my behalf and I am simply reimbursing that amount to him. So it does not amount to incurring an expenditure in respect of which payment is made to a relative. But if suppose my related party appoints some employees on his own payroll and supplies to me for which I make reimbursement, then that expenditure of salary I am not paying to that employee directly, but my related party has engaged the employee on terms and conditions that he has entered into, and I am paying that expenditure to related party. Such expenditure will have to be reported. Now, if suppose it is a pure reimbursement of your own expenditure to a related party, whether a clarification is required. If at all one wants, one may put a clarification that certain amounts were reimbursed to a related party, but the expenditure was contracted by the SSC and not by the related party, so it is not considered to be payment made to a related party. So this is another technical point which one may consider. Since there is a separate session on this, I am not discussing 80 8 and 10, this is just for reference. We will omit this. Now let us see this comparative analysis. Now, related party transaction as per section 297 of the Companies Act 1956, where under the Companies Act, the current Companies Act, it is still relevant because the section dealing with related parties in the new Companies Act is not so far notified. Among the 98 sections, it is not so far notified. But it will be notified before March it is done. So again we will look at the new Companies Act and see. A director of the company, a relative of the director, a firm in which such a director or relative is a partner, any other partner in such firm, a private company of which director is a member or director, And in section 80 IA10 on closely connected person, as it was discussed, there is no guidance. So the only small point is whether an assessee can take related party under the Companies Act and say that it is a closely connected person. My personal view is that probably closely connected person one may have to independently evaluate, go by dictionary meaning, go by the relationship and decide whether the party is a closely connected person or not. But I am not dealing with this in detail because in next session there is a separate session on this. The speaker will deal with this. Now between 48 and 80 IA10, some distinction is necessary to understand. In 48 means substantial interest is defined. In 80 IA10, closely connected party is not defined. That is the distinction. In 48 SPT will not be applicable on any payment made to a step-down subsidiary. But in 80 IA10, certainly these transactions will be covered because closely connected person will include even a step-down subsidiary. There the language is not holding of substantial interest in 80 IA10. It only speaks of closely connected person. So step-down subsidiaries will be covered there. I think we will take a few case studies now. Now suppose RIL has subsidiary 1, under subsidiary 1 it has subsidiary 2. Now if subsidiary 2 is not claiming any deduction under 80 IA, then SPT will not be applicable on any payment made by RIL to subsidiary 2 as per section 48(b). But if subsidiary 2 is claiming deduction under 80 IA, then SPT will apply because then it will become a closely connected person within the broad definition under 80 IA. Now again, it was discussed earlier, I endorse the view that you cannot have a specified method for a category of expenditure. But this is a list of methods which we generally apply. Generally, it is not watertight. Generally, interest paid is taken under CUP. Now again, several questions were discussed in this break. That suppose I take secured loan from a related party and pay interest. It is easy to benchmark and apply CUP because even banks have their rates of interest specified according to the credit rating of a particular borrower and the nature of industry. So it is possible to follow up. But in the case of a real estate, that is builder, developer or real estate dealer, where they borrow at 24% to 30% per annum rate of interest, unsecured loan, how to follow up and whether there will be any justification. Now, if you ask personally, according to me, see, you can't follow up, but there can be justification even if you have paid interest to a related party. See, you can't have a bank's code. If you ask even Citibank, ICICI Bank or any private sector bank that for personal loan, what interest you are charging, it will be in the range of 18 to 19%. Not about 20% at all. Now for unsecured loan, if this is the rate of interest charged by banks on personal loan, can you apply this rate to real estate industry, where normally borrowing is done at 24% to 30% and where money is borrowed from a related party? I think here, as DI suggested, if you lay down your facts clearly, explain the industry in which you are operating and provide a few examples of independent party borrowings where similar rate of interest is charged, probably it is a good benchmarking and you have benchmarked your transaction properly. So it is not necessary that all the time when you follow curve only from public domain you should have a quotation or a benchmarking percentage. Guarantee commission generally curve, but of late in international transactions you have seen many tribunals have gone by the interest rate. It means if holding company has given guarantee for subsidiary, without that guarantee at what rate subsidiary would have got loan from bank, and with that guarantee at what rate bank has given loan. Suppose without guarantee it would have been 14%, with guarantee it is 12%, 2% is the spread. Tribunals have said that 1% guarantee commission should be charged. So either you follow up, obtain quotes for bank guarantee from banks or similar institutions providing full credit worthiness and details, or you follow the interest paid method. Now interest paid method is not accepted in all cases. They have gone in appeal and they have argued that curve is the right method. But then this is the latest development. So there is another method